Hello, YouTubers and NFL fans everywhere. This is Matt, the NFL Fanatic, giving you my 2019 NFL season review video. What a crazy season the 2019 NFL season has given us, and it is quite amazing that we're already 11 days from Super Bowl 54, where the Kansas City Chiefs beat the San Francisco 49ers 31-20 in a fantastic game. I want to congratulate the Kansas City Chiefs for winning their second Super Bowl championship since 1970, back from Super Bowl IV when they beat the Minnesota Vikings under the leadership of Hank Stram. When you look at what the Kansas City Chiefs were able to do, I look at how, for Kansas City, this was a quite remarkable postseason. They were the first team in NFL history to have 3 double-digit comebacks of 10-plus points or more in a single postseason, and to win all 3 of those games by at least double digits of 10-plus points or more in every one of those games. Patrick Mahomes had 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions through the whole postseason run. For Andy Reid, this is the longest gap for a head coach between winning a Super Bowl. It was the second longest gap between appearing in Super Bowls for Andy from 2005 to 2020. I believe the largest gap was Dick Vermeil when he took him about 20 years from the Super Bowl with the Eagles against the Raiders back in the day, back to Super Bowl 34 when he was with the Rams, who beat the Titans in 1999. So, congratulations to all those Chiefs fans and players. For the Niners' perspective, I thought the Niners played a solid game through at least 75% of the game. I was surprised at how they really didn't want to run the ball going into the second half, or use more of Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, through the first half of the game, in my opinion, was going to be the MVP just due to how many, unique ways they were using him. They were using him as a receiver. They were using him as a reverse end-around runner, and he was just making a lot of significant plays when they needed him to. And in the fourth quarter, they didn't even target Deebo Samuel, which was quite surprising. And I also feel like with the Niners, they went too far away from the run. They put the ball too many times in Jimmy Garoppolo's hands, and Jimmy Garoppolo showed them that he could not get it done. And every Patriot fan got a big smile, or every Tom Brady supporter got a big smile on their face, because I kind of agree, or I agree, Tom Brady would not have choked like Jimmy Garoppolo did in the Super Bowl. Jimmy Garoppolo had a good stretch from the second quarter, or to, the second and third quarter of the game playing effectively. But people do need to realize he threw one of the worst Super Bowl interceptions you'll ever see. Not in terms of big moment, but he literally threw a football with his eyes closed to Bashaud Breeland, who, if he had enough awareness or maybe enough thought, he could have maybe returned that for a pick six. And then, of course, the second one was just him. I'm not going to put as much blame. That was him just heaving the ball down the field. But that was just a make good for Kendall Fuller, who had the interception just the play before, just went out of his hands. And when you look at how the Niners were doing, defense was doing a pretty solid job. They got 3 turnovers on Patrick Mahomes, a strip sack from defensive end Nick Bosa, along with 2 interceptions, one from Moore, who came in, I believe, for Jaquiski Tartt, who went out of the game for an injury at that point in the game, and the other one was to Fred Warner, the middle linebacker, even though that one was off Tyreek Hill's hands. And when you look at the Niners, it was also just one of those weird things where I think the coaching let them down. Kyle Shanahan is now part of the 2 largest collapses, or the 2 largest collapses in terms of points. The first one, of course, 3 years ago, Super Bowl 51, when the Atlanta Falcons blew a 28-3-point lead and he was the offensive coordinator. And this year, with a 10-point collapse, there have been multiple 10-point collapses. You could just look at Seattle just 5 years before that, but he now is in that club where he has the 2 largest deficits under his watch. And I think that will be a question moving forward. I think the Niners, they have a lot of good core pieces around. That defensive line will still be around. The running game will still be around. The majority of that offensive line, except center Ben Garland, who is a free agent, will be around. And I have just the utmost confidence in the 49ers that they will get an extension done with George Kittle, to re-sign Emmanuel Sanders, and that team will be right back in contention going into next year. I just think the problem is, for a lot of Niner fans, we're just going to be in the big moments. Can Kyle win these games? And can Jimmy Garoppolo win these games when they need him to? If you look at the first 2 games, they really didn't ask him to do a lot of throwing in both the Vikings victory and the Packers victory. Remember, he threw a grand total of 8 passes. He joined only, I believe, the other two, Burt Jones and Brian Greasy, the only quarterbacks in those conference championship games to have under that many throws in a conference title game. The Niners do need to make some cuts, I believe, in terms of cutting Jerick McKinnon. I also believe Eric Armstead could be a cap casualty. I don't think they need him with all the other defensive linemen they have in B. Ford, Solomon Thomas, DeForest Buckner, and Nick Bosa. Those are the 4 or 5 main guys they need to hold on to. Or you could argue they should cut Solomon and keep the others around. But yeah, one of those guys will not be on the team next year, but that's a good core. And I think the Niners are in a great position. But the Chiefs are in just as good a position, in my opinion. If you look at how the year they had, they went 12-4. They ran into a bit of a rough spot through weeks 5 and 6 when they lost back-to-back home games against AFC South teams. The Chiefs game was the first time, I believe, in Patrick Mahomes' career he was held under 20-plus points. And then the next week they lose 31-24 against Houston, where Houston had a 17-point lead, or Kansas City had a 17-point lead that the Texans were able to come back from. But that was mostly due to their ground game, which had a fantastic game all the way around. And you just look at the Chiefs, most of their core guys are basically signed down, except for one predominant one, and that's Chris Jones. And I do not believe he will be a Chief next year, because he is one of the biggest, he's their biggest defensive playmaker in their front seven, and he's going to want his money. And I don't think the Chiefs, having them have to pay Patrick Mahomes probably $40 million a year, and anybody out there that's upset or shocked or angry that Patrick Mahomes will get $40 million a year, I'll just say this. There's no hole that you can poke at for Patrick Mahomes besides having an injury. He's put up the numbers. He's been pretty much durable for a majority of his first 2 years. He has playoff success. He's battled adversity. He has a Super Bowl championship. He's a great sponsor for the league, a great face for the league, no off-the-field issues, a good leader, a good face, and he's just earned that money. Because I feel like with what you saw out of Patrick Mahomes, remember, he didn't have Tyreek Hill for about the first half of the season, and they still were able to win 4 to 6 games without their fastest weapon in their offense. And you look at what Patrick Mahomes, has in terms of just getting more knowledge, getting more comfortable. He has good enough athleticism to make spectacular plays with his legs in terms of scrambling to make throws and scrambling to get first downs. He's earned every bit of that $40 million paycheck the Chiefs are going to give him. I would not give him a fully guaranteed contract, but if you said to me, let's pay Patrick Mahomes 5 years, $200 million with $160 to $170 million guaranteed, I would accept that wholeheartedly. I think that is absolutely fair. And going into next year, he is clearly the best quarterback in the NFL moving forward. So I think the Chiefs are in good hands. I think a couple other signings that you have to look at. I would look at Anthony Sherman. The Chiefs are one of the very few teams that still rely on a fullback. He'll be a free agent. And Kendall Fuller, one of their better secondary players, he'll be a free agent. And they're going to need to try to find some way to sign him if they can. Because with that defense, if you lose Chris Jones, if you lose Kendall Fuller, Sherman, they could probably find another fullback, but Anthony Sherman's one of the better fullbacks in the league. I think for them, it's going to be just a little bit harder with everything going on with Patrick Mahomes. But what a crazy NFL season it was from across top to bottom. When you look at the Bengals, for a great example, the Bengals, were the worst team in the NFL, and they really had a lot of issues. A.J. Green did not play the entire year. You had Tyler Eifert go down with some injuries. They had Darqueze Dennard. They had Drake. You had Drake or Patrick, who had an okay year. Geno Atkins is probably the best defensive player, but he couldn't do anything. But Andy Dalton, you've seen the end of Andy Dalton. They tried to put Ryan Finley in there for a couple games, if you remember, and he really couldn't do anything. And it was weird because they basically used Ryan Finley as a reason just for an evaluation, which I kind of felt weird because I was like, as soon as you benched Andy Dalton, you should have been able to just let Ryan Finley play out the rest of the year because they were basically guaranteed a number 1 draft pick at that point. And I think for the Bengals, they will take the LSU quarterback, Joe Burrow. and he will become their new quarterback. And I've heard that Andy Dalton will be traded somehow, or they'll be willing to work with Andy Dalton. If I was the Bengals personally, and this is what I'm going to tell everybody in this video, I would like to see Andy Dalton become a Carolina Panther. Because the Carolina Panthers, I believe, are going to move on from Cam Newton. And if you look at the Panthers, and again, I'll talk about some other teams. The Panthers were definitely an interesting story of how everybody thought the Panthers, were going to have a nice bounce back year. Cam Newton was going to be fully healthy. Remember in the third preseason game, he injures his foot, and then he plays a grand total of 2 games after that. The second game, his last game being the immortal game where they, on 4th and goal, tried to run Christian McCaffrey on an end around instead of just having him go up the middle. And that was the end of basically their season. And then you had Kyle Allen come in, who the year before won a won a meaningless game. I'm sorry, he won 2 meaningless games. He beat the Atlanta Falcons in Week 16. In Week 17, he beat the Saints in the final game where they rested all their starters, even though it's kind of surprising now, especially seeing what Teddy Bridgewater did, just knowing that just the year before that, he got blown out by Kyle Allen, or his team blew out Teddy Bridgewater's team by 26 points, 33-7. And Kyle Allen went on a nice run, and there were actually some people, including myself, thought, Kyle Allen, you will take the cheaper value of production that Kyle Allen was giving you compared to what Cam Newton was going to give you at a much higher price. But by the end of the year, everybody that thought that, including me, kind of looked silly at the end where Kyle Allen reverted to being Kyle Allen, the ineffective, okay backup quarterback that he is, and then they benched Kyle Allen, brought in Will Greer, who couldn't do anything at all, and now the Panthers are in just, big conundrum. The best, of course, bright spot for the Panthers was Christian McCaffrey, who became the first running back in NFL history to, like they said, they had 2,500 rushing yards and over 1,500 receiving yards in his first 3 years. The best weapon, the most versatile weapon in the NFL. He will get a very handsomely rewarded payday here very soon, maybe even this offseason. Very well deserved. But I think if you look at the Panthers, their defense, when Ron Rivera got fired, they gave up basically. Remember, they got blown out by the Falcons pretty decisively. They got blown out by the Colts. They just at that point really could not get motivated to play very well. They lost to the Redskins in this final game on a 29-22 game, which is kind of a shocking and saddening way to end the Ron Rivera era. And now they are in the Matt Rule era, with Matt Rule, who has a $60 million contract moving forward. And I think for him, I think the reason why Andy Dalton should go there is that the Panthers want to move on from Cam. David Tepper wants to put his stamp into this. They have a good enough pick that they can maybe trade up for a quarterback or at least get a quarterback. But if they don't do that, or they don't take a quarterback and they let Cam go, the Panthers are basically going to become the Sixers part of where they're just going to just process this year. They're not going to have a lot of talent out there, and I don't think they're going to try to win as many games. At least if Andy Dalton, you could at least give them a competitive face. Or Andy Dalton still may lose a lot of games, but at least you can say you have a low-level starter who has plenty of experience to take over for the Panthers moving forward, and they can, move on with the quarterback competition next year, or get maybe Trevor Lawrence or get another quarterback the following year to replace Andy after just this 1 year. Especially with Andy Dalton's contract, he only has 1 year left. And there's only $16 million. I could live with that if I was the Panthers. But, so you look at the Bengals, they're going to blow up basically that entire team. I don't expect Geno Atkins. I don't expect Tyler Eifert. I don't expect A.J. Green. I don't expect Dalton. They're not all going to be back there. They're just going to basically give Joe Burrow this brand new roster and give him luck there. When you look at a lot of the disappointing teams in the league this year, a couple that come to mind, including for me, are the Los Angeles Chargers. Were a massive disappointment. They reverted back to being the Los Angeles Chokers, and it was quite amazing to me because I remember there was the one stat, I think I mentioned it back in Week 15. The Chargers, they had this amazing thing this year where whenever they won a game, they blew out their opponent. And it got to the point where going into the Jacksonville Jaguars game, they were 5-8, but they had a positive point differential. The Jaguars had the same record, and they were down, I think they said 70 points. They had a minus 72 point differential, which was, kind of the big thing. But I don't think anybody expected the Chargers to have such a disappointing season. with how they played. In most of their games, they had a 3-point loss to Detroit, 7-point loss to Houston, 7-point loss to Denver, 7-point loss to Pittsburgh. They lost to 3-point loss to Tennessee, 2-point loss to Oakland, 7-point loss to Kansas City, 3-point loss to Denver. They had one blowout where the Vikings blew them out at home, and then 7-point loss to Oakland and 10-point loss to Kansas City. So they only had 2 out of their 11 losses. 9 of them were from 7 points or fewer, and 2 of them were just decisive or blowout. And you just look at the Chargers. Melvin Gordon did not have as great a year. Melvin Gordon, to me, is now expendable because of how Austin Eckler did this season in Melvin Gordon's absence and with Melvin Gordon being there. And especially everybody's probably found out by now that Phillip Rivers and the Los Angeles Chargers have mutually agreed to part ways, which I think is significant. I think for the Chargers, they are going to go after a quarterback. I mean, the 2 guys that the 3 people that are going to be considered, in my opinion, are going to be Tua Tagovailoa, the University of Alabama quarterback, Justin Herbert, the quarterback out of the University of Oregon, and Tom Brady. I do believe with Tom Brady and how the Patriots season ended for the first time in 10 years, the first time in 10 years, the New England Patriots went one and done, and Tom Brady and the Patriots for the first time in 3 years did not make the Super Bowl. So for me, I look at the Chargers with that situation. Look, they still have Eckler. Their offensive line needs some work, but they just officially hired Shane Strickland to be the offensive coordinator permanently, and he earned that just about the well they played. Anthony Lynn got a multi-year extension from this past year, which I did not agree with because I felt that Anthony Lynn, he earned his mulligan this year. He earned his mulligan in the sense of where he had 1 year left on his contract with what he had done. People seem to forget that Anthony Lynn started out 0-4. So this guy wasn't blazing out of the gate. He went 9-3 to finish, and that was great. But, and then he went 12-4, beat the Ravens just 2 years ago, and then this past year he bottomed out. But I think the Chargers, that was an incredibly disappointing team, especially with the talent they had. They did have some injuries with Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, and Derwin James. Derwin James being the most significant, being out a majority of the year. And I do think the Chargers have pieces. I just don't know with their quarterback situation. If they go with a young quarterback, they may give Anthony Lynn another year. And they go with Brady, they instantly become one of the more intriguing teams going forward. I think the Chargers were a significant disappointment. The other significant disappointment in the AFC were the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, to me, were basically... They were... How their season ended, they were essentially the 2011 version of... Or the most recent version of the 2011 Philadelphia Eagles, where the Cleveland Browns brought in all this talent, all this additional talent in terms of wide receivers, Odell Beckham from the New York Giants and Jarvis Landry, who they had signed in free agency from the Miami Dolphins. They brought in Kareem Hunt, former Kansas City Chiefs running back, who had a relationship with John Dorsey. They brought in Olivier Vernon. They brought in Sheldon Richardson. They brought in Austin Corbett, the center from the they traded him. No, they traded him away. Joe Thomas had left. They traded away Jabril Peppers in that Odell Beckham deal, and they brought in Morgan Burnett. So they had a really talented team, and I just think it was a lot of the inability of the Browns coaching staff and just the immaturity and the lack of continuity between the Browns players all the way around. Baker Mayfield had a significant sophomore slump to where he was basically last or second to last in every quarterback metric, and he was second in the league in turnovers, only behind Jameis Winston. And I look at the Browns in the sense of now, look, they've hired a new coach, Kevin Stefanski, the former Vikings offensive coordinator. Amanda was in Minnesota for over 11 years. The weird thing is, I think the Browns fans need to realize is that Kevin Stefanski, I think, was really a puppet offensive coordinator. Gary Kubiak was a significant offensive assistant, and Gary Kubiak's offense was ran in Minnesota. So, how good is Stefanski? I don't really think he's that effective. He just has a, significant advantage to just being with the Vikings for 11 years. When you look at also what the Browns did, they hired him. They also hired a new general manager, Andrew Berry, formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles, where he was with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's now back in Cleveland. I think he has an interesting array of talent that he has to work with. And they brought in Myles Garrett just yesterday. Got supported or got reinstated into the league. So I think the Browns have something there, but I definitely think with the Browns, they were definitely a Philadelphia Eagles type dream team scenario where they brought in a lot of talent that they thought was going to jumpstart them back into contention, and now they're just at a point where nobody's going to have nearly as much expectation for the Browns moving forward next year. And then when you look at all the other AFC teams, I thought that with the AFC North, the Steelers, what a year they had. I think that Mike Tomlin had one of his better coaching jobs of the year. And if Mike Tomlin was able to win Week 16 and get into the playoffs, I think that Mike Tomlin should have been arguably Coach of the Year for what he was able to do without having Big Ben for 14 games, without having James Conner for a decent portion of the year. Juju Smith-Schuster was out a good portion of the year. And they had no Antonio Brown. The defense was fantastic. Minkah Fitzpatrick, probably the best in-season trade deadline trades they had. Giving up that first-round pick was well worth for what Minkah Fitzpatrick did for the Steelers all the way across the board. That was an old-school Steeler defense that Chuck Noll and Jack Lambert and Steel Curran, they would all be proud of. Bill Cowher, who's going into the Hall of Fame, they would all be proud of that defense. I just think the problem is that after Ben and Conner went out, they really couldn't get that great of a running game going. Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph showed that they don't really have the contingency plan after Ben, because Mason got benched and Duck Hodges got benched for times throughout the season. But I do think with the Steelers, getting Big Ben back, hopefully, maybe trying to get another running back, or they have Benny Snell to also try to help out. Maybe they should let Benny Snell have more opportunities to carry the ball, especially with James Conner's injury history. But I do think the Steelers can be right back in contention with a couple offensive weapons at wide receiver and maybe another running back and some other defensive line help, especially with Bud Dupree being a free agent. I don't know how much they'll be willing to pay Bud this offseason, but I do think that's where the needs for the Steelers are going to be there. When you look at teams such as like the Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts, the Jacksonville Jaguars were one of the more, typical Jacksonville seasons. They're now in a weird situation to where Gardner Minshew will be probably the leading starting candidate for the Jacksonville Jaguars going into the 2020 season. I know Doug Marrone and Shad Khan said that they're going to give Nick Foles a fresh start, especially since they fired Tom Coughlin through the season. But the Jags, they're at a point where I think they need to blow everything up. Because just think about it, just 3 seasons ago, they had a 10-point lead in the AFC Championship game against the New England Patriots in the fourth quarter with the best defense in the National Football League. And now just 3 years later, with everything going on with Jacksonville, with no quarterback, solidarity or quarterback stability. They have a running back in Leonard Fournette who had a really good bounce back year. He was a top 5 or 6 rusher, I believe. But he kind of has a Doug Martin quality to him to where you have 2 really good years. Or you have 2 really good years, his rookie year and his third year, but that second year is still in between. So you don't really know what to do. I think he's earned the 5th-year option, but that's it. So let him have the next 2 years to play, and then let's see what happens from there. But the Jags, they're going to have to make some moves with Marcel Darius. They're going to have to make some moves with Calais Campbell and maybe A.J. Boye in terms of just trying to move the salary cap around because this defense, it's not really being effective. Telvin Smith's retirement was significant development in how ineffective they could be. And Yannick Ngakoue, if I was him, I wouldn't come back. I think with the Jags, they're not in a good state right now with what they have. And I think for Yannick, it's a great opportunity to cash in on maybe a more effective team unless he really, just doesn't care about winning and he just sees the Jaguars give him the biggest contract. Again, good for him. But again, I will say this. He definitely understands the capitalistic mindset of contracts, and good for him there. But Yannick Ngakoue, if he re-signs with the Jaguars, I will say this right now, he does not care about winning. And he's a Maryland Terp guy, and I don't like saying that about, but I feel like with him, he does not care about winning if he signs a long-term extension with the Jaguars, and, we'll see about that with Jacksonville. When you look at Indianapolis, they had such a, unique situation this year of Andrew Luck's retirement coming right after the third preseason game. It actually was one day before my birthday. One day after my birthday. He was actually announced to the Colts on my birthday this past year. And the Colts, I thought that they actually still might have had a chance to win the division through the first six weeks. Jacoby Brissett looked like an effective quarterback to where the Colts were going to be able to win games based on what they have with the offensive line, based on what they have with the running game of Marlon Mack, and based on what they have with T.Y. Hilton as their number one receiver. Devin Funchess was an absolute flop because he broke his shoulder early on in the year, and they really couldn't use him. Darius Leonard going out for a few games, significant on the defense. And you look at the Colts defense, and they tried their best, but the Colts defense was really more about scheming and execution more than talent. And that showed that after Leonard left, the defense really could not hold up their end of the bargain. You have guys like Clayton Gathers who were there. Malik Hooker got hurt again. Pierre Desir's okay. You have other corners in Indy that are okay. But it's just one of those interesting things of Indianapolis that I feel that they are in a weird situation to where Frank Reich has to eat his mulligan. I think Frank Reich is a solid coach. But they're going to be in, I think, both the Tom Brady possible sweepstakes. I'm sorry, they're going to be in the Phillip Rivers sweepstakes. Because I feel like Phillip Rivers, for them, he's a good enough starting quarterback. And Frank Reich's history of being the offensive coordinator back in San Diego with Phillip Rivers will provide them, some continuity there. And I do think it helps the Colts elevate themselves into contention with the Texans in the South. And then when you look at the Texans in the AFC South, I look at them and go, well, let's look at Bill O'Brien and his tenure as the Texans head coach this year. He really got saved by Deshaun Watson in a lot of games. Deshaun Watson had an underrated year, in my opinion, at the quarterback position. He was probably a arguable top 5 or 6 quarterback in terms of how he was able to lift the Texans into another 12-win season. He had some rough games. He had the Ravens game where he didn't look great. He had but that was basically it. There were some other games like the Saints game where he was competitive, and that was a close loss. You had the Chiefs game where he won. You had the Colts game, which was competitive, and there was a controversial in the grass penalty that was called that could have been the difference in the game there. But I really think the Texans are in a spot where they're going to be, to me, like the Minnesota Vikings going into next year. The Vikings and Texans are very similar kind of stories, in my opinion. They are two quality teams that you could argue are, to me, Houston is 4th in the AFC going into next year behind the Patriots, Ravens, and Chiefs respectively. And I look at the Vikings very much in that same regard of where you could put them behind the Niners, Seahawks, Packers, and the Vikings and Saints would be between 4 and 5, or Vikings, Eagles, whoever. But you could put them in that same situation. Talented across the board. They have running games. The offensive lines, are decent. The receiving cores, you have Stills, you have Hopkins, you have Fuller, the tight ends that goes to Minnesota. But they're just teams that have a lot of talent around them, but they just seem to have a ceiling of the second round. To where, look, the Texans could beat a Buffalo, or they could beat a Pittsburgh without Ben, or they could beat a Denver. They could beat an Indy in the wild card round if they meet them. But as soon as they went up against Kansas City, as soon as they went up against Baltimore, and just like with the Vikings, as soon as they go up against Green Bay, as soon as they go up against the Niners, or as soon as they go up against Seattle in the second round, they're gonna lose just because they're not as talented. Or with the Texans, I think it's more coaching. They're not as talented as those other teams, and they just can't do anything effectively enough to be effective with all they have. So I think that's what the Texans are. I think again, Deshaun Watson. He's kind of amazing how Deshaun Watson, through his first 6 games, went 500 and broke basically every offensive record for a quarterback through his first 6 games as a rookie. And then in the past 2 years, the elevations of Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson's kind of become an afterthought of where people are like, hey, this is Deshaun Watson we're talking about here, and he's still one of the better quarterbacks, and still he should arguably be in that conversation of great young quarterbacks for franchise moving forward. I think the difference is you have Andy Reid and John Harbaugh as your coaches, and Kansas City and Houston and Baltimore, and you have Bill O'Brien as your head coach, who is now also the GM in Houston, which I don't think is a good thing. And that's the difference there for the Texans. And then when you look at the Titans, and I'll go to the NFC real quick soon as well, when you look at the Titans, they are in a situation where they had a fantastic run. But they're the first team in NFL history to have 4 straight 9-7 seasons. And it was just a weird story of how with with Ryan Tannehill and Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota was a was a former number 2 overall pick that I thought, he was kind of questionable. And it's always just been this weird thing with the Titans. And every Titans fan, shout out to Keith Bailey, will continue to tell you this. Every time you bet on the Tennessee Titans to win a football game, every time you think they'll win a football game, they'll lose it. But every time you try to doubt this team, they will play solid, consistent, non-penalty football. And you saw it this year. Nobody thought they'd beat Cleveland in week 1. They did. Nobody thought they could beat Atlanta, when they played Atlanta. They did. Nobody thought they could beat the Chiefs. They did. Nobody thought they could beat the Ravens. They did. A lot of people didn't think they could beat the Patriots. They did. So, like that's what the Titans are. Every time that you see them in these big spots, every time they're doubted, they play very good football. And they play winning football. But every time you bet on them to win a game, it was, you look at Denver, choke that one. You look at Jacksonville week 3, choke that one. You look at Buffalo, choke that one. You look at all these games and you're like, that's what the Titans are. Very rarely do you get it where the Titans, you expect them to lose and they lose, and you expect them to win and they win. Very rarely does that happen. I think the only couple times for me that happened was with Indy the second time in Indianapolis and Jacksonville at home. Those are the only 2 times I was like, I picked the Titans and they actually were to play an effective game all the way through and win. And those 2 games started by Ryan Tannehill. And look, the Titans have 2 big contracts that they have to work on going into this offseason. Quarterback Ryan Tannehill, who I think should get a franchise tag and not a long-term deal, and running back Derrick Henry, who became the first running back to have 4 straight 180-plus yard games ever at the running back position. And he was the number 1 running back through the first 2 games of the postseason, behind Terrell Davis in terms of total yards, rushing yards per game. So when you look at the AFC East, I think, for me, and I will tell everybody this now, the Dolphins and Jets are in situations to where the Dolphins had a season where if there was ever one of the most impressive 5-11 seasons, it's Brian Flores' Miami Dolphins team. Like, to me, that record doesn't tell you how effective and solid this head coach is. Because to take that team that through the first 4, 5, 6 weeks looked like they were genuinely trying to tank and just genuinely going through the process, by the end of the year, they won more games than the Dallas Cowboys. They won just as many games as the Philadelphia Eagles. They even beat the Philadelphia Eagles in a game with Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback. I think it's the end of Josh Rosen as a starter in the National Football League if the Miami Dolphins, gave you an opportunity to compete with Ryan Fitzpatrick, you lose to Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then you have the opportunity to have the job in Miami. Josh Rosen, he plays 3 games. You could argue that was too short of a sample size, which is fair. But then after that, Ryan Fitzpatrick takes over the rest of the way, and the Dolphins go on to, win 5 more games under Ryan Fitzpatrick. And also, I'm going to give Ryan Fitzpatrick credit. He is the first quarterback in NFL history to beat the Patriots, or he's the first quarterback in NFL history to beat one team in the division with every other team in the division. Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2011 as a Bill, in Week 3 beat the Patriots. Ryan Fitzpatrick Week 16 of 2015 beat the Patriots with the Jets, and Week 17 of this past year, 2019, he beat the New England Patriots with the Miami Dolphins. Also, that was Miami's only second victory in the last 16 years, or in the Tom Brady era, that they were able to win a game in that way, or in that stadium over the last 16 years. So, congratulations to the Dolphins for that. But I look at the Dolphins and go, they have the most cap space. They have a coach that believes in them. They're going to have 2 extra first-round picks this year, thanks to their trades with the Steelers for Minka Fitzpatrick and a trade for Laramie Tunsil and Kenny Stills from Miami to Houston. And I think the Dolphins can be somewhat competitive, but I still think they're about another year away and a quarterback away from genuinely being competitive. And then you look at the New York Jets. They're just not a great, Le'Veon had an up and down year. Sam Darnold had mono, but by the end, Sam Darnold did finish 7-5, getting a win over a playoff team in Buffalo. Playing consistent football against the Giants, against the Redskins. He beat the Cowboys in a game that nobody thought, and one of the upsets of the year. But also, he had the other upset of the year on the other end of it, having only 1 or 2 victories against Cincinnati Bengals. Or losses against Cincinnati Bengals, sorry, I digress. But I think the Jets are just kind of where they are. They got Jamal Adams they have to worry about moving forward. They have Robbie Anderson going into free agency. Quincy Enunwa has a neck problem that you don't know if he can really play again. Le'Veon just kind of seems he's in it up and down for the money. And I think for the Jets, it's one of those aspects to where I think the Jets are going to be the Jets next year. To where they went 7, 8 wins, that's okay. I think that's okay for them in this aspect of where with the Jets, I genuinely don't know if you're going to have a situation to where the Jets are going to really move forward with what they have. The team I want to tell everybody about for the AFC, it's the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills are going to be, to me, the interesting team. They have a great structure with their general manager, their head coach, their cap situation, and their roster. And to me, the 2019 Buffalo Bills are the 2018 Chicago Bears. I think if you want to bank on a underdogs, dark horse team going into next year to go further than people expect, to me, it's the Buffalo Bills. You have organization, staff, coaching, cap, quarterback talent. It's very similar in the way with the Bills and Bears. To me, it's eerily similar. Defensive-driven teams that play a lot of average football teams in Chicago, and were able to play effective and consistent football. And to me, the quarterbacks are very similar. Trubisky and Allen. Trubisky and Allen are more athletic than deemed throwers. I think Allen has a stronger arm, but I feel like with Trubisky, he may not have the accuracy that Trubisky can have at times. But it's all up to them to improve their teams. Because the offensive lines are solid in Buffalo. The offensive line was okay in Chicago. Though Kyle Long this year retiring is a big blow for the Bears' offensive line. And for the Bills, they're going to be okay there. But it's that same sense. If Josh Allen can maintain or improve his game going into year 3, the Buffalo Bills are going to be my dark horse team to surprise everybody next year in the AFC. Because I really think they have a great structure. They have a great with Sean McDermott, with Brian Daboll, with Leslie Frazier, with Hauschka. I think Hauschka, has problems. He missed a lot of 50-yard field goals this year. The defense is solid with Tre'Davious, Tremaine. You have, even though Lorenzo Alexander retired, that's okay. You have Jerry Hughes. You have Starr. You have a lot of good defense. Ed Oliver. You have a lot of good defensive talent in Buffalo with the offensive talent they have. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be the surprise team that everybody should look out for going into next year. And in the AFC West, real quickly, with the Raiders and the Broncos, the Raiders just kind of rated themselves. They started at they ended up having a 6-3 start and ended up choking out the rest of the way. The worst one was probably losing to Jacksonville in the final game in the Oakland Alameda Coliseum. And I just think for Oakland, it's not really going to have that much of an improvement moving forward. The only bright spot you could have is probably Josh Jacobs and some of the young defensive players like Eric Harris, Max Crosby, and Arden Key on that Raiders defensive line. Real quickly with the NFC, when you look at the NFC, a lot of the interesting stories that I have to me are like the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys this past year were very, very, very opposite. The Cowboys had probably one of the most talented rosters. Quarterback, you could argue quarterback, with Dak and all that. Even though Dak by far had his best statistical year on record. But you look at Dak from his statistical standpoint, you have Zeke, who got paid the highest running back contract in NFL history, ending up being a top 5 rusher. But at the end of the day, he really couldn't do that much. But the Cowboys were in so many games they couldn't close. The Packers are the opposite. They were in so many close games, but they could finish and get them into a position of being the number 2 seed. They got a break because of the Niners. They got a break because of the Niners beating the Saints in that probably the game of the year in the regular season. But I think with the Packers, there's really not a lot they can do. They need to get another receiver, but I feel like with the Packers, as long as the Niners are going to be there, I just think the Niners just have way too much talent to really, especially on the defensive line. I just don't think the Packers can really match up physically with that defensive line. And I think when you can shut down, the running game for the Packers, it's really not going to be that great because Rodgers won't have enough time in those games, to make plays. And it's one of those things where I told everybody that the Packers-Niners game was not going to be really competitive. I wish it was Niners-Seahawks because the Seahawks know how to play the Niners, and they played them close pretty much the whole way through. And when you look at the Packers' season going into this year, I just think it's one of those things where it's not going to feel as exciting because, like the Packers, they missed the playoffs, but now you just have this feeling of where the Packers can win games, but can they beat the Niners? Because they're going to play the Niners again this year, and it's just going to be one of those things where as long as the Niners structure is going to be there, I don't think they really have a chance to beat them, and Pat and Rodgers is probably going to be able to end his career after this contract without another Super Bowl title or even appearance, thanks to the 49ers. When you look at the other NFC East teams, the Redskins and the Giants just going through rebuilds at this point. Ron Rivera's taking over in Washington, and that's okay. I'm not the biggest Ron Rivera fan, but he has a lot of holes he has to work through. I think one of the things he can do is bring in Greg Olsen, who was let go from the Panthers, to join over into Washington. So I think that'll be an interesting question for them. And the Giants, look, they fired Pat Shurmur after an abysmal year. I never thought Pat Shurmur deserved to be hired in the first place. But when you look at the Giants, they have Barkley, they have Daniel Jones, who was probably the best rookie quarterback, or second best rookie quarterback behind Kyler Murray. And I think the Giants can maybe move forward, but who knows with Joe Judge, the former Patriots special teams coordinator and wide receiver coach for 1 year. Though I think the special team coordinator aspect should be a credit to him, and that's just because, look, I guess I'm a Ravens fan, I understand John Harbaugh. But the wide receiver coach part, that'll be the part that gets criticism, because I think the New England Patriots wide receivers were the worst core for them, or worst receiving core in the NFL this past year. We'll see about that. I think for the Eagles, they're in a spot where they had a tremendous year, or they're having this typical Philadelphia aspect now, to where people are going to expect the Eagles to be downtrodden through injuries or frustration or locker room tension, and then through about 12 games, they're going to win 4 or 5 games, but the division is going to be so bad, that the Cowboys and the division will be in reach, and in the last 4 to 5 weeks, they'll pull off a winning streak that gets them into the playoffs, and maybe gets them a playoff victory, maybe 2. Who knows? But I think with the Eagles, with all of them getting back healthy, they will be okay. I think Darren Sproles' retirement, it's not that big of a deal. I wish him a happy retirement. One of the best all-purpose yards players in NFL history. That's not me just being nice to him. That's clearly proven in the stats. And I think the Eagles are going to be in an interesting spot going forward and improving way. And then you just look at the NFC North with the Bears, and I'll just say this about the Bears and the Titans. The Chicago Bears are going to have a Tennessee Titans problem, I believe, next year. To where I think the Bears, they need to bring in another quarterback to compete with Mitchell Trubisky, or to make sure Mitchell Trubisky knows that his job is not safe going after this year. And I think the Bears, with that defense, with David Montgomery at running back, with that offensive system from Matt Nagy, I think the Bears can have maybe a Tennessee Titans type run going into next year if they change quarterbacks. If it's the same, the Bears are going to be, in a 7-9 win range. They're probably not going to make the playoffs, and Matt Nagy will get fired in his third year, just based on him not being able to get Mitchell Trubisky to play out of Mitchell Trubisky's shell. And then finally, when you look at the NFC West, I look at the West where the Niners still are the top team. Seattle still to me second. They had a tremendous year. Remember, they were basically the anti-cardiac kids, to where they almost went into cardiac arrest 12 times, but they were able to survive 10 of those 12 games with 1-score possessions. And I think with the Seahawks, look, they have a big decision to make about Jadeveon Clowney. Russell Wilson, though, proved basically all his worth by carrying his team into an 11-win season. He got another playoff win, which is his 9th. He has the most wins in NFL history through a quarterback's first 8 years, first or second most through a regular and regular and postseason combined. And he's the first quarterback in NFL history to start a career with 8 straight winning seasons. They have $50 million in space to work with. That might go a majority of it to Jadeveon Clowney. I wouldn't do that, just because I think of Clowney's injuries, and I feel like that $50 million could be spent on other assets that can help the Seattle team, an offensive line, defensive back, maybe another wide receiver. And I think that'll help the Seahawks, gel forward. When you look at the Rams, they're basically in a pigeonhole, because I think the Rams, they have their top 4 guys all guaranteed money, and they already have like $16 million in space going into this year, and they can't cut any of those guys. They may cut Todd Gurley, but I think that'll be crazy. And for me, as somebody that did not like Todd Gurley getting that contract, you gave him that contract. He's earned that right to have that contract going into next year, and you sleep with what you sleep with what you sow. So good luck with the Rams on that. But this is why I didn't want to pay Todd Gurley that kind of money, especially when you find out about the knee. It's just like, great, so now we got to spend all this money. and we can't do anything about it. And you may say it's cruel, but that's just business. And then when you look at the Cardinals, they had a great offensive mindset. Kyler Murray had a good year, and he's definitely their face moving forward. I do want to tell everybody though, watch David Johnson's movement this offseason. I think David Johnson, with what Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake did, I think the Cardinals have found a contingency plan to use those two guys at running back to be not as good as David Johnson, but serviceable enough to have a running game. And when you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they have $79 million in cap space. They need to have a running back because Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones are just not cutting enough. David Johnson knows Bruce Arians' system. David Johnson had his most effective year in Bruce Arians' system in 2015. He really broke out in 2015. The offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, the offensive and defensive staff, or the offensive staff is basically still there. And I think the Bucs, could desperately use a David Johnson type player for the next 2 years at that price to really help try to give their quarterback, if it's Jameis Winston or somebody else, a really nice security blanket in terms of a versatile running back moving forward. So those are my thoughts on the whole NFL season. Anybody has any questions, please put them down in the comment section. I want to thank everybody this year for watching all my videos, all the old viewers, all the new subscribers, all the new viewers. Thank you for watching these videos. I enjoy doing them every year. I may do, if I have some time, I may do some draft videos, a top 100 review video, and just ask me any questions that you had during the off season about what you would like me to talk about at certain points. And for me to close this video, I'm going to give everybody my Super Bowl 55 prediction. I believe in Tampa Bay, Florida. My way too early Super Bowl 55 prediction, I believe it will be a rematch from this past Super Bowl. It will be the first time since the 1992-1993 season with the Cowboys and the Bills. I am going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 55 in Tampa Bay, Florida in February of 2021. So that is my way too early prediction. Again, a lot of things can change, but that will be my prediction going into the offseason, or that is my way too early Super Bowl 55 prediction. I'm going to go for a repeat here of the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. So again, thank you all for watching this season. Like, comment, rate, subscribe. Please ask any questions in the comment section. I'd love to hear from any of my viewers. And until the next time, if it's later this offseason, or until Labor Day Monday of 2020, this is Matt the Automatic signing off. Until next time, so long.